On June 7th, 1921, Sheriff Elbert Combs walked into the clerk's office in Jackson, Breathitt County, Kentucky, because a man named Boaz Rigsby had come 11 miles up from Troublesome Creek with 3 daughters and a Bible tied in calico. The bluegrass sun lay flat across the courthouse blinds, and on the desk of Clerk Thaddeus Penland sat a brass county seal beside a 4-inch ink pad like a weight left cooling after use. The room smelled like ink and sour milk. Before we continue, drop a line with your city and the exact time on your clock right now. One question drives everything that follows. How far did the forged marriages reach beyond that one kitchen table? Sheriff Combs was not a man to chase talk. He counted things. He counted 17 torn license stubs in the wastebasket, all ripped on the same angle, the corners pointed like arrowheads. He counted $2 laid down clean on the desk for each slip, coins quiet on the wood. He counted the gap in the seal's bite where 3 tiny teeth should have marked the circle and didn't. Names anchor this file. The father is Boaz Rigsby. The daughters are Iola, Junia, and Almira. The clerk is Thaddeus Penland. The sheriff is Elbert Combs. The midwife is Sibylla Tate. The minister is Reverend Lem Greeley. The physician is Dr. Eldred Pruitt. The neighbor is Mina Tolliver. No other names enter. Boaz quoted verses with a voice that sat easy in a room. He spoke of binding and loosing and keeping a house decent. He told Thaddeus the preacher up their way filled names later to save shoe leather so a man might carry only stubs. Thaddeus laughed once and reached for the seal. The circle came down smooth, as practiced as a slap. The mouth rose again with the same white crescent in its bite where those 3 teeth were missing. 11 miles is the distance a man can ride in before a clerk sobers, and out again before the clerk sobers twice. Boaz timed it that way. He hit the steps when the lunch crowds fell off, and a desk went unguarded for 15 heartbeats. He came with 1 daughter on his left, 1 on his right, and the 3rd in the doorway, where the light did not find her face. The drawer held more truth than any mouth. The wedding band lay to the left of the pad that day, not the right. The ring had 3 nicks set at uneven intervals, 2 shallow and 1 deep enough to catch a thread. A folded rag hid it like a secret. When the rag moved, the smell lifted with it. The room smelled like ink and sour milk. Mina Tolliver lived by the beach gate to the Jackson Road, a fence 10 rails high with 1 post struck white by lightning. She saw Boaz pass her yard 3 times in 1 week on the same sorrel mule with the Bible tied the same way. The girls rode behind him in turns, hands flat on their skirts as if trying not to leave fingerprints on their own dresses. On the second ride, a blue ribbon was tied so tight at a nape that the points dug into a collarbone and stayed. Sheriff Combs found the first hard edge in a petition to annul. The paper held 4 lines in a careful, cramped hand, Junia's, and a docket stamp. Over the corner had a blue smear where a finger had slipped as it folded. The seal that stamped that docket had the same crescent gap. Someone had pressed the same wrong mouth twice on 2 different acts. 3 numbers hold the ground like stakes. 17 torn stubs, a 4-inch pad, 11 miles to Jackson, 2 more keep the shape, 3 teeth missing in the seal, $2, left flat for each slip. You will see them again. Boaz never asked Reverend Greeley to stand with a book. He asked the midwife for linens. Sibylla Tate kept a ledger under a hymnboard in a chapel where plaster fell like cake at the corners. Her ledger listed births, month bleeds that stopped without reason, and debts paid in butter. The ledger came into the light because she wrote 3 wives in 1 bed on a scrap, walked away from it, and sent a boy to the sheriff with a hymn number and no explanation. The first anchor scene belongs to that ledger and the wall that swallowed it. Reverend Greeley stood on a chair and lifted the hymn board while Sibylla scraped at a thin seam in the plaster with the back of a spoon. Under the board was a cavity 3 handspans tall and a forearm deep. Old plaster dust fell soft as flour. On her sleeve, Dr. Pruitt held a lantern low. "Mind the nails," he said. The light showed a line in the dust like a finger had been there first. Greeley slid his fingertips into the crack and drew out a bundle wrapped in white cotton stitched with 3 blue threads down its length. He laid it on the altar table with his palms flat for a breath as if steadying the building. He cut the threads with a penknife that nicked the board. Inside lay a ledger as big as a folded newspaper, edges gray with the oil of hands, leaves stitched with linen. On the flyleaf was an X made with a nail, not ink. The room smelled like ink and sour milk. Sibylla turned the leaves with the backs of her fingernails. Her hand had the discipline of a schoolgirl's. She never wrote a word when a number would serve. 1 page named Iola Rigsby, 8 pounds. And at birth, and later on that page, menses ceased again, then wedding band left, with no groom named. Another page held Junia, bedproof cloth cut narrow, and a third had Almira, pain with hymns, a dot laid so close to the letter it looked like a tear. Between her neat entries, 3 times, on 3 separate leaves, she had drawn small circles where names should have been and left them blank. Beside each circle she wrote, "License stub only." The circles were the diameter of a ring laid flat. In the margin of one, she copied a mark from a seal's edge, a broken crescent where 3 teeth should have bitten and hadn't. The ledger smelled faintly of smoke baked into paper. Sibylla said she wrote those notes late and alone with a candle stub tilting in a saucer and a kettle hissing, because the chapel roof leaked and she had to boil her water in the same room where she wrote. Her sleeves had lines of blue from the ink she wiped with a bottle rag. The rag, folded, sat on the altar rail. The folded rag had the same faint sour in it. She did not name it. She didn't have to. Mina had more to say once she started talking. To paper. She took her washing to the creek on the last lean week before harvest and set her tin pail in the shallows. From there, she could see the courthouse windows, 3 across. She saw a man lift a seal and bring it down 3 times in a row with no clerk moving behind it. She knew it was 3 because the brass flashed the same way in the same gap each. Press. The light made the missing teeth more visible, not less. When a janitor closed the blinds, she tied a knot in her wash rag to fix the count in her mind. Mina watched the stairs, too. Boaz went up tight against the rail with his calico-tied Bible under his arm. Iola followed. A quarter hour later, he descended alone. Mina counted that time by the way a dragonfly settled and rose from her pail. 6 settles, 6 rises. Iola came out with a folded paper pressed flat to her stomach like a heat pad. She did not look up. She looked at the crease in the paper as if it could be smoothed with her gaze. Sheriff Combs brought Clerk Thaddeus Penland to see the ledger. Thaddeus kept his fingers on the table edge as if the wood might jump. He said, "I stamp what comes," and let his eyes lag a beat behind every page. When Combs laid the wedding band on the open ledger, the 3 nicks caught light. Thaddeus looked everywhere in the chapel except at the ring. The room smelled like ink and sour milk. Combs asked Iola for her paper. She showed her petition to Annul, the docket stamp biting a corner and a clip mark, the width of a thumbnail pressing the paper flat where the ring had lain for a minute. Her petition said, "I cannot be my own mother." No adjectives. She did not ask to leave a house. She asked to leave a shape a man had pressed with a county mouth. Dr. Eldred Pruitt counted bruises by the width of a finger and said how old they were by color. He did not talk in medical Latin because no one would have listened. He wrote down 2 measurements he thought might make men behave like men. The distance between the cuts on the ring's nicks, 3/8 of an inch, and the diameter of the seal's mouth, 2 inches, though the teeth made it seem smaller. He wrote those numbers in neat columns, then pushed the paper away from the pad as if heat came from the felt. Reverend Lem Greeley, who had married 100 couples and buried more, opened his book and showed empty lines where a Rigsby wedding should have been. He had 1 burial that season, Mary 1 Hoskins, 14, fever, and 1 birth, Hoskins boy. Under the birth he wrote, "Father named as uncle," his hand tight enough to scratch paper into a bruise. That Hoskins line wasn't a detour. Sibylla turned a later page and showed a blank circle for Mary 1 too, with the side note, "License. Stub only, seal gap same." The missing teeth had traveled at least once. The reach was local, not grand, and still too wide. You could set your hand on a map and cover it with a palm and catch every house that mattered. Clerks fail 3 ways: drink, money, praise. Thaddeus thrived on the last. He liked hearing that a seal made things lawful in the Lord. Boaz gave him that line before coins touched the desk. $2 each time, laid flat. No change asked. The motion felt like tithe. It wasn't. It was payment for the circle's illusion. Sheriff Combs kept the pad in the window for an hour. He picked up the lid and turned it. Its thin brass clip had a smudge inside the lip he could not name. He scraped it with his knife and touched the smear with his finger. He wiped it on his sleeve. The sleeve kept the memory better. Then paper. The room smelled like ink and sour milk. He wanted the bound license book before he moved. Thaddeus said he'd fetch it from the vault after dinner. He went alone, and when he returned, his face had gone white at the edges like paper, held too close to a stove ring. He said the lock was stiff. He said the book was there, but shifted. He did not carry it into the room. Boaz went home the long way that afternoon, not by the road. Mina watched him leave with 2 folded papers, under the calico, and 1 daughter walking, not riding. Almira walked with knees ash-gray from scrubbing and a handkerchief balled tight in her fist. When she opened her hand to drink from Mina's dipper, her palm showed a blue lint line. Dr. Pruitt followed the smell because doctors learn to listen where men pretend not to. He opened the clerk's windows and set the pad in the sun. He dripped clean water through a folded linen square and touched it to the felt. Blue bled into the fibers like a bruise. He folded the linen twice and set it aside. He said, "That's a bottle rag used wrong." He didn't explain. He didn't have to. A case like this is paper or it is nothing. The third anchor scene belongs to a document you can hold and a loss you cannot outrun. On March 10th, 1922, a spark found the courthouse file room before lunch. It built for half an hour and ran a second half. The license book blackened to a brick you could sit on. That morning, Sheriff Combs held the single piece that mattered most, Junia's affidavit. 4 pages sewn with blue thread, her name printed at the top in letters that stood straighter than her back ever had at home. The first page said she had been joined without an officiant. The second named the ring with 3 nicks as the only token presented. She touched each nick with a finger while she spoke and left 3 blue dots on her skin. Combs set the paper inside a hymnal to keep it flat and went for Reverend Greeley to witness the lines. When the bell on Main began to clang, Combs ran back for the hymnal, not for the drawer. The book lay where he had left it, on the sill where light was cut into 4 bands by the blind. He opened it and found 2 neat holes in the fold where thread had been, and no paper at all. The linen thread ends remained snipped clean. Smoke curled along the ceiling like a man painting a line. The room smelled like ink and sour milk. By the time the flames finished, the seal had softened to a lump. The felt shrank to a puck. The license book sat squat and hard, the color of a stove lid. Thaddeus stood in the street with his hands flat, on his thighs like a man braced for a blow. The blue under his nails did not wash off with lye. Sibylla did not pray. She used the penknife again and cut a thin strip of felt from the pad before it cooled into something no blade could slice. She wrapped the felt in muslin and tied it with her own blue hair ribbon, ends squared 3 knots. She set it in her pocket and tied the pocket string tight enough to leave a mark on her hip. Later that week, they needed one room where neighbors could see the same table and stop lying to themselves. Reverend Greeley opened the stone-floored hall behind the chapel. That is the one public scene, and it does not repeat. It lasted as long as 6 hymns and as long as a bucket of water takes to go warm. They put 6 objects on a scarred table where a stove had once sat. The 4-inch pad lid with its brass clip, the brass seal, mouth open, 3 teeth missing, the nicked wedding band, Sibylla's ledger open to a page with a blank circle and license stub only written in a tight hand, a stack of 17 torn stubs rescued from the wastebasket and aligned like cards, and Mina's blue ribbon tied in 3 knots and square cut. 107 people filled the room by count. 2 infants slept. An old man kept his hat on and held the brim at his chest like a shield. Greeley did not preach. He named each object once. Dr. Pruitt stepped forward with a dish of water and washed the ring, then lifted it, the nicks still blue. He said one line that made bodies lean. Without thinking, "You cannot make a wife with a stamp." The quiet after that line lasted a full breath and the length of another. Sheriff Combs held up a singed triangle torn from a page recovered at the file room door. It was big as a man's palm. The corner showed a line of Junia's affidavit with 2 words, separated by a dash and a smudge, and that was enough. Forced and father. Mina did not cry. She turned the bow of her blue ribbon so the knots faced the ledger. Thaddeus had one thing left to give. He reached into his coat, produced the seal handle, and set it down. The mouth was empty. Where the 3 missing teeth should have seated, someone had packed a ridge of candle wax into a crescent. The crescent had turned the color of milk left out. The room breathed in and did not breathe out for a beat. Mina told Combs later that she left the hall with a taste in her mouth like she had bit into a peel. She said the smell followed her home and sat in her kitchen chair. The room smelled like ink and sour milk. Boaz did not leave the county. Men like him seldom do. He sat on a porch with his boots set side by side, toes touching, and a chair turned to face the road, not the yard. Combs set the seal handle on the rail where Boaz could see the empty mouth and the wax crescent. "You pressed it," the sheriff said. Boaz looked down and said, "If a book says a thing, it is so." Combs did not reach for a verse. He reached for the paper that was not there. The county judge could not unspool a fire. He could not restore teeth to brass. He could sign an annulment, and he did, for Iola. The docket stamp bit a clean circle with the same crescent gap because there was only one seal in the county. The annulment carried the mark of the false marriages as if mocking itself. That is, the kind of rhyme that keeps a man awake. Junia would not sign a second paper. "One made the heat go up in our kitchen," she said. She would not carry 2. She stayed with Reverend Greeley's sister through a season and then walked out before daylight one morning and did not come back through that door. Elmira went to an aunt at Leatherwood and returned once because hunger is stronger than fear when the leaves are down and flour is low. 11 miles can be walked if you start early enough to beat the eyes that watch a road. Thaddeus did not keep his chair past winter. His name left the door one morning. For 3 days no one sat at the desk. When a new seal came from Frankfurt, the brass teeth bit clean. The circle closed without a break. The new clerk said a perfect impression and proved nothing except that metal. Did what metal does? He was right. A clean circle on a page is silence. Reverend Greeley kept the nicked ring in his desk and misplaced the key. Dr. Pruitt kept the felt in a jar made for cotton, sealed with wax, scratched 3 times with a penknife. Mina kept the ribbon. Sibylla put her ledger back in the chapel wall, stitched again with 3 blue threads, and slid it in with a wooden spoon so her fingers wouldn't touch the hiding place. Sheriff Combs tied the 17 torn stubs into a bundle with twine, and set them in a flour sack under his bed because there was no shelf they belonged to. Each object did one job and did it quietly. Now the rest of the road backfills without smoke. Combs rode out toward Troublesome Creek to see where a man poured a life into a shape. The Rigsby house was a plank box with a porch that tilted and a yard rutted by the same mule's feet. He marked a table scar where a ring had been pressed as if to see whether paper might pick up wood grain. He marked a saucer with a bite out of its rim and blue scum dried in the chip. He marked a Bible that was the right size but the wrong weight, because the calico underwrap hid a wooden block cut to fill the space when no leaves sat inside. He found 3 drawers with wax crumbs at the corners where the wood met the sides, as if a seal had been set into warm wax there to keep children out. He found a bottle rag that had been washed at the edges and never in the center, folded into a tight square that kept its stink. He slid these things into a sack and left the chair facing the road exactly as it had been. He stopped at the Hoskins, place coming back. The creek there narrowed around a bend and put a shine on the mud like lamp oil. The house smelled of sorghum and stove smoke. A Bible lay on a shelf with blue beetles dead under it, stuck to the varnish. Between 2 pages, a dried flower had left a ring where something wet had once sat. He did not ask for a story. He had one. The ledger opened new rooms whenever Sibylla dared to turn a leaf. She showed a page with a column of small sums, 50 cents for soap, a quarter for cloth, $2 set down for license with no names written. On that same page she had drawn, small and correct, the seal's circle with the broken crescent gap. She must have traced it once on the back of her hand, and then drawn it again from memory the way a schoolgirl copies a letter. She showed another. Line, barely inked, Iola, band left, returned by neighbor, the neighbor unnamed by decency, the act recorded anyway. A later line read, Junia, sickness after prayer. And a number beside it, a day count only Sibylla could explain, marked off with 3 hatch lines and a 4th not finished. Those hash marks were not superstition. They were fear made neat. Mina counted the passes by her gate again and again in her head, the same 3 in the same week, the same mule, the same calico. She bent the blue ribbon around the ledger's edge once, then untied it and wore it to the store to buy salt so the town would see the color and ask, enough did, not enough. Reverend Greeley wrote in his own book along the margin a line he had never needed before, refused to solemnize on sealed paper. After the fire, that line sat there ironic as a joke burnt to ash. He kept the empty mouth of the old seal on his desk as a paperweight until a boy came in for catechism and stuck his finger in the crescent wax and came away with milk-colored crumbs. Greeley brushed the crumbs into his hand and threw them into the stove. Dr. Pruitt tested the felt 3 ways he trusted. He wrung a drop into a saucer and watched the blue crawl back from the edge. He dabbed it on his own skin and smelled the sour back in through the nose's top like grief. He set a flypaper beside it. The flies landed at the same corner of the felt, the one that had touched the pad most often. When he wrote a slip for his jar, he used the only words that fit, indeterminate source. He hated the hedge and used it anyway. Sheriff Combs mapped the clerk's room on a scrap, sketched the desk, the pad's corner, the window, the wastebasket, the path from the vault. He traced a line a man's hand could have taken to snag a paper sewn with blue thread from a hymnal on a sill by pulling the thread and letting the pages fall out. He traced a line from the vault to the window in a sill marked faint, where wood had been rubbed by a wrist. He kept the scrap under his hatband until sweat erased the pencil. He tried to account for the 17 stubs. He laid them out like a thin deck. The torn corners all faced the same way. The ink circles all lacked the same 3 teeth. The paperweight was cheap stock, not what the county ordered that spring. He took 1 stub to the feed store and held it against a receipt book and found a match in the way the fiber took ink. Thaddeus had been using the wrong paper by hand or by accident. Either made the circle easier to fake. Boaz did not press his case again with a minister. He pressed with a stamp. When the new seal arrived months later, its teeth bit a perfect ring. No one wanted to compare the new bite with the old bites, even to be sure. They wanted the new circle to mean anything pressed under it was clean. The new clerk made the first impression on a blank book cover and called it practice. The circle looked right and said nothing. Elmira went to Leatherwood and back once. She carried a small envelope with a pressed fern in it and a pencil, drawing of a ring with 3 nicks laid out like the points of a clover. She had drawn the shape on a scrap from the inside of a flour sack. Mina put the scrap in a jar and screwed the lid. Mina did not know what to do with the drawing except to keep it flat. Iola found a place in Mina's kitchen where a girl could sit and hear men argue and not be made to choose a side out loud. She set the docket copy of her annulment on the table, the corner with the circle where the teeth should have bitten cleanly and hadn't, and she traced the crescent gap once with her nail and said, "I won't wear a ring that came from a drawer wet with blue." She folded the paper 3 times so the gap faced out. Junia spoke least and kept the hardest line in the hardest place. She said, "Putting words on a page puts heat under a pot." And she looked at the stove like a person checks its back, is to a wall. She chose to stay quiet in a house where doors banged from a wind that did not always come from outside. Her quiet was not consent. Quiet made space for the next act, which was motion, not sound. Sibylla scrubbed the altar rail where the ledger had lain and rubbed blue into white paint until the streaks blurred into a pale that might have been in the wood since the day the boards were milled. She took to wrapping her pen in a strip of cloth so ink wouldn't run down and stain her fingers. She marked 3 new births and wrote "No seal seen" beside 2 marriages she had witnessed herself. She had never done that before. She began now. Reverend Greeley made the only sermon he dared. He stood and read the words that had always introduced vows, and then stopped and said, "These words are not tools." He shut the book and left the pulpit. He did not name any house. He did not need to. 6 men stood in the aisle as if to go, then didn't. 3 women left early and stopped at the chapel door to stare at the hymn board a breath too long. Dr. Pruitt told Sheriff Combs that he could sign any paper the county gave him, but he could not sign a girl's sound on the inside when a house bent her. He said he could measure bruises and weigh babies. He could say a ring had 3 nicks and describe them. He could not make a court see those nicks for what they were. He wrote findings, ring, confirmed 3 cuts, and drew the nicks on his paper. Then he crossed out his drawing because he hated pictures that had no force. Mina watched the courthouse one afternoon when the new seal arrived. She saw the new clerk press it into the pad and onto a blank scrap and hold it up. The circle's edge bit right all around teeth, even, no gap. The clerk smiled and people in the room exhaled as if a stove lid had come off a pot. Mina tied her blue ribbon tighter. The right circle did not release the old wrong circles from the pages they already lived on. Sheriff Combs thought about throwing the 17 stubs into the stove. He did not. He tied them into their thin deck and slid them under his bed in the flour sack. He had never kept evidence there. He did now because there was no box in the courthouse that could keep paper safe from hands that wanted it soft. He did not write that choice down. Boaz took to carrying his Bible untied, as if to show that calico had only been for weather. The weight of the book changed day to day. Some days it looked hollow. Some days it bowed his arm. Once, on the porch rail, he set it down and went inside. And Mina, standing across the road with a basket, saw him through the screen lift the cover and tuck in a folded paper the size of his hand. She could not see the color of the thread. She saw the care of the tuck. The county left the burned file room as a scar. The bricks stood darker there. The floor bowed a little where the weight had sat. When spring damp came in, the smell came back for a week, as if the felt had gone to ground and then risen. People walked past that door and breathed through their mouths. The room smelled like ink and sour milk. The practice did not scale, but it spread in small, crooked ways. A Hoskins blank circle sat in Sibylla's ledger, with the note, "Seal gap same." A page that should have carried a Miller wedding showed a smudge where a circle had been pressed wet and smudged again, and the line, "Minister refused, no witness." 3 households. A clerk's hand, a seal's mouth. That is not grand. That is a county. Years, not names, piled up after the new seal came. That is how a place hides what it cannot undo. Iola's annulment lived folded in Mina's tin under a sack of salt. Junia's half-set affidavit survived as a singed corner in a line everyone in the chapel remembered by different measures. Elmira's scrap drawing of a nicked ring yellowed. Dr. Pruitt's jar with the felt and his slip reading indeterminate source sat on a shelf where dust measured time better than clocks. Sheriff Combs died with a pocketbook that had a number written on the back cover. The number was not a date or a fine. It was a count he had made of trips up and down a road, girls on mules and girls walking, papers pressed and papers burned. The leather wore the pencil down until only a ghost line showed, and then not even that. His bed left a dent in the floorboards, exactly where the flour sack had sat. Somebody swept under thereafter, and the dust in that corner was bluer than any other dust in the house. Reverend Greeley aged like a fence post weathers, slow, taking shape against what leans on it. He kept the nicked ring under his papers, until he gave it to Mina, who strung it on a cord and hung it on a nail by her window. She said the ring needed to see daylight, so it would not grow important in the dark. She did not wear it. She would not. Sibylla Tate wrote fewer lines in her ledger with time. Her hand shook more, but her letters stayed stern. She marked 2 marriages with witnessed, book present, seal seen, and then underlined seal seen once. She underlined nothing else in 10 pages. She cut her blue hair ribbon into 3 threads again and tied the bundle shut with them and pushed it back into the chapel wall with the wooden spoon. Dr. Pruitt retired and sent his jar to the county as a curiosity. The wax around the lid had cracked along the 3 knife scratches. A clerk wrote a tag for it with a soft pencil and misspelled indeterminate. The tag lay under the jar and took on a ring from the glass. Mina died with the ribbon in a drawer wrapped around a shell. Her brother had brought back from far off. The ribbon's blue had dulled to cornflower. The knots stayed square. The end still had the square cut. When her niece cleaned the drawer, she kept the shell and nearly threw the ribbon until the square cut pricked her memory like a thorn. Boaz left his chair at last because chairs do not last as long as men intend. He went into a house where the doors closed by themselves with springs. The Bible on his shelf weighed the same every day there because nothing could be tucked into it anymore except a folded handkerchief. On the day he left his house for the last time, he set the Bible down on the porch rail the way he always had, as if he were returning from church. The rail had the shine of 1,000 rubs of brass against wood. If you need a ledger total, here is the only one that does not betray the facts. The forged marriages depended on a county seal with 3 missing teeth and a 4-inch pad, wiped with a bottle rag that carried a sour milk stink from slow carelessness. A clerk pressed the wrong circle 17 times while taking $2 flat each time. A father used that circle to perform a binding that no book backed, then carried the paper under calico and inside a Bible cut to hollow. A midwife wrote license, stub only, in a ledger and drew a blank ring where a name should be. A neighbor counted passes by her gate and tied 3 knots so the number would not change later. A fire took a book, and a thread took an affidavit from a hymnal, and the mouth of the old seal showed its wax crescent in a public hall where a doctor said, "You cannot make a wife with a stamp," and a room did not breathe for a beat. Now 2 questions that cut the other way. If 17 torn stubs sat in a wastebasket a day after a man left $2 flat on a desk, why did the clerk not stop after the first 3? If the room smelled like ink and sour milk every time the seal came up and went down, why did the rest of us talk about scripture instead of opening a window? The last image belongs to now because paper cheats time 2 ways. 40 years on, a volunteer at the county library threaded a reel of courthouse microfilm onto a reader and turned the crank. Frame 16 showed a docket page with gray edges. Frame 18 showed a receipt for a replacement seal. Frame 17, which should have held the afternoon of Junia's affidavit, wasn't black like a gap or bright like a light leak. It had the color of thin milk poured across glass, and on its edge someone had typed one word that matched Dr. Pruitt's old slip without meaning to. Indeterminate.